All right, everybody, we are back, and in this subsection, we are going to be talking a little bit more about harassment and stalking. But keep in mind, as I said in the last subsection, bullying and harassment and stalking all have very overlapping definitions, very overlapping both legal and cultural definitions. And so it's very, very difficult to kind of separate out instances of bullying, instances of harassment, and instances of stalking. But we're going to choose to talk about harassment and stalking and at least attempt to kind of get out, separate those out from bullying. Now, harassment and stalking, at its lowest level, it's just annoying, right? It can be an incredibly annoying process. Many, many years ago, I myself actually had a cyber stalker, and luckily it didn't reach much beyond the annoying level, but it was incredibly annoying. I had to completely change how I acted online, what information I posted, what social media accounts I was kind of willing and able to link to other social media accounts. Now, when it moves past annoying, there's the fear for personal safety, right? Luckily, my cyberstalker was in a completely different country, and thus I wasn't too worried about my physical safety because it would have taken them a heck of a lot of effort to even, come close to my physical location. But when the cyber harasser or cyber stalker is someone you know in real life, say an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend or a coworker or somebody who just lives in the same city as you, your fear for personal safety can be extreme. If you really want to be disturbed, you can go online and just look for people's stories about having a stalker. They're incredibly disturbing, scary, and one of the worst parts about it is how little law enforcement is either willing or, in a lot of cases, even able to do to help victims. Luckily, this is slowly changing, but not nearly fast enough. One of the great tools that stalkers tend to use are keyloggers. And we've talked about keyloggers in a previous section, but remember, keyloggers are malware that you can infect a victim's digital device with, whether that's desktop, laptop, cell phone, whatever. And then it records every key that's pressed and sends that information to the offender. And that is incredibly useful for cyber stalkers because not only can they get phone numbers and, they can get things like the date and location of doctor's appointments and work schedules and phone numbers and email addresses and all the information they could possibly need to stalk and harass and show up at physical locations when the victim is going to be there. Another very useful tool for cyber stalking that I didn't actually put on this slide are GPS devices. I've read a disturbing number of reports of stalking victims who found some kind of GPS tracker on or in their cars or their purses, some other thing that they take with them, either in most places they go or every place they go. So the cyber world has absolutely made it so much easier to stalk and harass victims. Another tool commonly used by stalkers is impersonation, which again we discussed briefly in the last subsection, but impersonation is just where the offender creates some kind of online account or, over the phone, impersonates the victim in order to either make their lives worse or to find information about where that person's going to be and when. So for instance, the offender might pretend to be the victim, call the victim's work or call the victim's doctor's office and say, hey, what's the schedule? When am I supposed to be there? And then use that information to show up when the victim will physically be at that location. Bandwagoning is when you get a whole group of people to kind of pile on to the victim. So, in other words, the offender utilizes their friends or acquaintances online or in person to kind of team up and form kind of an offending pack in order to harass or stalk or belittle or bully the victim. And this bandwagoning thing is disturbingly popular, disturbingly powerful. As you can see here in this graphic, Mountain Dew had a contest to name the new flavor of the Mountain Dew beverage, and there was a bandwagon of bad actors, offenders, who decided to completely change the possibility, submitted their own names, and then voted for the worst ones. Voted for the really truly disturbing, disgusting, terrible ones, just to mess with the Mountain Dew company, right? That's bandwagoning. Now, similar to bullying, trying to find the prevalence of harassment and stalking is difficult because, again, there's problems of definitions, there's problems of time and place, but the vast majority of evidence that we have might disagree on how much is actually happening, but they pretty much all agree that the incidence is rising. It's getting worse. There's more and more online harassment, online stalking as time goes on. And again, that's probably a lot to do with the fact that we just have much more digitized lives where there's more people online. There's more of our lives that are online. We spend more time and more parts of our life are digital and connected. Now, for the victim, what happens? Well, again, there's kind of a continuum of possible effects. Sometimes there's no real effects, right? People are able to just say, oh, that's just some idiot online, and ignore it. Unfortunately, I was not one of those people. I was not even able to just ignore my one, again, relatively minor cyber stalker. But emotional and psychological harm, similar to cyberbullying, anxiety, depression, fear. There's a lot of kind of emotional and psychological impact that knowing somebody is out there obsessed with you, trying to find you, trying to track you, trying to learn every single detail of your life so they can use it against you in some possible way. That takes a toll. Truancy is when students don't attend school. And bullying, stalking, harassment, if the offender is somebody at the school, then victims are going to not want to be there, right? And the emotional and psychological harm coming from that harassment, stalking, bullying event is going to cause that student to not want to attend, and they're going to find a way to not attend, right? So truancy, not attending school, is a very big problem. Leaving your job or your organization, not participating in your hobby. This is kind of the adult, I guess students and adults can all do this. But if your stalker figures out where you work, and where you work is somewhere that's open to the public, say a restaurant or a retail store, and they routinely show up at your job while you're working, that is going to be traumatizing, and that's going to be somewhere that person doesn't want to be. If you have a hobby of going out and doing a certain thing at a certain place in a certain time, and your stalker figures out that you're going to be there, and they're likely to show up, you're not going to want to go out and do that thing. So, having jobs, having hobbies, having participating in sports or book clubs or whatever is something we want to encourage both in in young people and in adults. These are all beneficial, socially encouraged things. But when you have somebody who's stalking you, harassing you online and in person, and is, even if they're not going to show up physically in person, they can send messages to the people that your coworkers, the people you perform those hobbies with. If they get those others believing negative things about you, or on their side with that bandwagon effect, you're not going to want to participate in those activities anymore. In extreme cases, being a victim of this kind of harassment and stalking can lead to institutionalization, because again, that psychological harm reaches that extreme level. And then the ultimate kind of negative impact is, of course, suicide. And the number of suicide attempts, and even worse, successful suicide attempts by victims of these kinds of crimes is a really disturbingly high number. There are a lot of people every year that either attempt or complete suicide because they feel trapped and unable to escape this negative pressure from these harassers and stalkers. Now, reporting. What do people do about it? Right? Well, there's very low rates of reporting. Whether we're talking about reporting to parents, reporting to school or work administration, reporting to police, reporting to anybody in any sort of authority position that can do anything about it, whether legal or non-legal, is very low. For lots of reasons. Similar to other cyber crimes, there's a belief that those in authority really can't do anything about it, and thus there's no use in reporting. There's also a lot of shame and embarrassment on the part of victims because they're a victim of these kind of negative crimes, especially if it involves something like outing, whether it's outing based on sexuality or sexual experience, or some really embarrassing activity that they had participated in or done earlier in their life. But they're just very reticent to tell anybody about this for fear of making it worse, for fear that that authority figure is going to judge them the same way that the harasser or stalker will. And when they do report, when young people report to parents, parents are very unlikely to report to other authority figures. And when students report to schools, schools are unlikely to report to any sort of further authority figures. They want to kind of keep it in-house, so to speak, and that very rarely works out well. It is disturbingly common for me to see people say that the solution to online bullying or online stalking or online harassment is just turn off your computer. And that completely neglects to realize how online bullying, online stalking, online harassment works. The fact that the victim turns off their computers doesn't stop the impact. It doesn't stop the offender from impersonating the victim and posting embarrassing things or finding out information about where they work and where they live and all those things. It doesn't stop the bandwagon effect. It doesn't change the real world implications at school or at work. So if you ever see somebody say that the solution to cyberbullying or cyber harassment is, oh, just turn off your computer, tell them they're stupid, because that is an absolutely ridiculous even attempt at trying to figure out how to solve this problem. Victims shutting their life off from what has become a really important, really impactful part of everyday life, i.e. the internet, is just not a solution, even if it did work. Even if it could work, that is not a reasonable expectation for victims. Now, When it comes to laws against bullying and stalking and harassment, there aren't a lot of well-enforced laws, and the vast majority of them are state by state. And each state is going to have different kinds of laws for different aspects of the kind of bullying, harassment, and stalking continuum. Stalking is against the law pretty much everywhere, but the problem is it's very difficult to prove, very difficult to enforce. So the advice I always give to anybody, if you're the victim of a stalker or a harasser or a bully, the advice I always give is document, 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 document. Save every chat. Save every text message. Save every picture. And don't just rely on kind of native app histories, right? Because there are a lot of, say, chat programs where people can send a message, and then once they realize, oh, that message is going to get me in trouble, they can delete it, right? So take screenshots. Take photos, save files of every single piece of evidence, every piece of contact, every negative message, every forum post, every time they impersonated you, every phone call they made to you or someone you know or your job or your school. Document, document, document everything, right? From the beginning. It's never too late to start. But keep copies of everything, and then save it not just on your local device, but keep it in your, a cloud storage account, or email it to a trusted, your parents or your best friend or your significant other, someone you trust very closely. Leave a copy with them as well, because the more documentation you have, the easier it is for law enforcement to do something about it. All right, that is the end of this section. It's a relatively short section, I know, but I want to end with just a reiteration that harassment and bullying and stalking is an incredibly serious problem. It's not just an annoyance in the vast majority of cases. This results in death. It results in physical harm. It results in emotional harm. It results in all kinds of real world negative things. Being flippant about, oh, just turn off your computer, or trying to ignore the real world harm that these crimes create is kind of, sticking your head in the proverbial sand. So please learn more about this subject. Take this crime seriously. But again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.